Genesis chapter 8, verse 22, it says, "As long as the earth remains, there will be planting and harvesting. There will be cold and heat. There will be winter and summer." This was a word that God gave to Noah after the great flood, when so much of the world was destroyed. And God planned to start over with a brand new people, hoping to cleanse the earth of all the evil. And then he promised that after Noah and his family came off the boat, there would be planting and there would be harvesting as long as the earth remains. I think so much about the people of the Bible whenever I'm working in the garden. I just can't help it. You know, this is life. This is real life. Growing your own food, growing vegetables in the garden. This is something that people have been doing for thousands and thousands of years. And they talk about it so much in the scriptures, where people are living off of the land and you survive by whether or not your harvest is plentiful and you grow enough food for you and your family and your community to live. We lose that in our modern times, I think, because it's just so easy for us to go down to the grocery store and pick up our food. We forget that even today in our modern world, really that's a blessing that we have in America. There are still many places in the world that don't have the blessings of having an abundance of food. There's still many places in the world that have to depend upon, to a large degree, how much food they can grow for themselves. But in America, in the 21st century, a lot of times it feels like we've sort of been spoiled. We've forgotten. And we just take for granted there's always going to be enough food. And a lot of people ask, why in the world would you grow a garden? Is it cheaper? Is the food cheaper than the grocery store? Well, I don't know about you if you're a gardener, but I spend a lot more money probably in my garden than I would if I just went down to the grocery store or the farmer's market and bought something. But that's not why I do it. I do it because I like to grow my own food. I like the taste of it. I like the idea of knowing that I labored and I earned what I am consuming. There's another thing too. It reminds me how fragile life is. One of the things that I've been dealing with this past couple of weeks is bugs in the garden, insect pests. I went out of town. I was doing really good, staying on top of the weeds and the bugs in the garden. And then I went out of town for a couple of weeks. I had a week of vacation, which was a wonderful trip. Check out my Facebook page and you can see some of the pictures from the trip we took. But also, after I got back from vacation, I had a week-long conference. So I was gone again, and that totaled together for 2 weeks. In the meantime, we got lots and lots of rain, for which I'm very thankful. But I wasn't here to stay on top of the weeds and the bugs in the garden. So when I got back, I found that much of my garden had been eaten up by bugs. Lost all my cabbage. We got a good harvest of Brussels sprouts, but we're finding a lot of bugs in that as well, and trying to decide right now. My wife is inside trying to decide if it can be salvaged for dinner tonight or not. Well, that's bugs. It's a part of gardening. They're there, and especially if you're not staying on top of your gardening, you're going to have things like these Japanese beetles that get all up in your garden. They're pretty easy to take care of. You just kind of walk through your garden. I like to do it in the morning before it gets really hot in the cool part of the day, and just pick off all of those bugs. They don't bite or anything like that, so, and they're really kind of slow and clumsy, so they're easy to pick off. But these are an invasive pest that were brought to the United States, and so they don't have any natural predators other than people that pick them off of their leaves. So that's the easiest way, is just, I like to pick them off by hand and throw them in a bucket of water, and that takes care of them. But you have to stay on top of it every day. If you don't, they'll multiply and you'll just kind of be overrun. But back to my point, in America in the 21st century, we've forgotten how fragile our food supply is. You know, we just think there's always going to be food. And the reason that we can enjoy that is because we get food from all over the world. We're one of the most wealthy, prosperous, powerful countries in the world. And so we get food from all over the world. We just import it. We import it, we buy it, and we sell it here. And you can just go on down to the grocery store anytime you want and get all of the groceries that you want. And if the crops fail in your local community, if your garden gets eaten up by bugs, no big deal, right? You just go down to the grocery store and buy what you need. In the ancient world, in biblical times, it wasn't like that so much, right? They had to have a good harvest or they would go hungry. Well, one of the things that reminded people was how vulnerable life is and how dependent we are on God. If you know, because the world is, nature, it can be very fickle. You get lots of rain for a couple of weeks, and then you don't get any rain at all for a month, and your crops just dry up on the vine. Or you have a plague of insects in your garden that destroy everything. Or maybe you have an abundant harvest and you just have more than enough. And it could fluctuate so much, swinging from abundance to scarcity in the blink of an eye. When life is like that, it reminds us how much we depend upon God to take care of us. And that's why I think for so much of the world's history, for the vast majority of the world's history, people knew that they depended upon God. It isn't until we find ourselves puffed up with pride because we live in a prosperous country that we begin to forget. And this is a cycle that humanity's gone through throughout history. You look back through history and you'll see that powerful empires rise up through hard work and the blessings of God, and the nations prosper. But then something sad happens. When they begin to really prosper, they forget that they need God. All of a sudden they think that their success or their failure rests all upon their own hands. And they feel like they're good enough, strong enough, rich enough, powerful enough to take care of themselves. What do they need God for? In America in the 21st century, to me right now, it feels like that's where we are. Do we really need God? What do we need God for? And what do we see in society? We see that people are turning away from God, not believing in God, thinking, hey, we've got this covered. What do we need God for? Well, if you can buy your way out of a problem, you can fight your way out of a problem with a great, strong military, it's easy to start to fall into that thinking. To get puffed up with pride like that. And that's what a lot of people are doing today. But look at your history again and again and again. Whether it was the Egyptian superpower, or whether it was the Assyrians or the Persian Empire, whether it was the Greeks under Alexander the Great, whether it was the Romans, you name it. The cycle goes over and over and over, and it just seems like people don't ever learn. We do need God. It doesn't matter how powerful our nation is, how mighty our military is, how much GDP and economic success we have. We are dependent upon God. And it behooves us to never, ever forget it. For whenever we do forget, we suffer the consequences. But anyway, I always think about the scriptures. And I think about the people of the Bible while I'm working in my garden. That's why I just can't help but share a thought or a meditation as I work out in the garden, because I just feel so connected to the people of the Bible. And it's not even just the people of the Bible. It's the people throughout history who have always earned our food by working the land. This is who we are as people. The very word human is related to the idea of being people of the soil, people of the earth. And just as God told Adam and Eve in the story in Genesis, when they'd sinned, he said, you will earn your living from the sweat of your brow as you tend the soil and earn your meals for the day. And you know, the sweat of the brow, that's an interesting statement. I used to always think that this idea of earning your living by the sweat of your brow, I used to think that what that was talking about was the hard work of being in the garden. And certainly in Georgia, in the middle of summer, if you're working in the garden, you sweat a lot. That's why I like to get out early in the morning or late in the evening when the sun is casting shadows and it's not so hot. You'll sweat if you're working in the garden, and it can be hard work. But that's not what God was talking about. You know, I don't know about you, but I like working in the garden. I don't prefer to sweat and be hot, but it's okay. I can deal with it. I just enjoy being out here. I enjoy doing hard work. That's a blessing for me, especially because most of my job as a pastor is working in an office, visiting people in hospitals or in their homes. It's a lot of thinking work, not a lot of physical hard labor. But I like working in the garden. I like to use my muscles. I like to get some exercise and do some manual labor. That's good for me, and I enjoy it. So, sweat of the brow, earning your living by the sweat of your brow, that's not about hard work. It's about this. It's about sweating and stressing whether or not you will have the food that you need. You see, God put Adam and Eve in a beautiful garden, and it was a paradise. They worked in their garden, but it was a paradise. It wasn't a curse to work the garden for them. It was a joy. And what is one of our greatest hobbies is gardening. We do it for fun. But when they sinned, the curse was that from then on, we didn't know whether they were going to have a good harvest. In the paradise, before sin, they always knew God was going to provide everything that they needed. It was never going to be in question whether they had what they needed. But after the fall, then they would always be stressing. They would always have the concern, are the crops going to fail? Are we going to have enough to eat? And we actually see in ancient texts this idea, this saying of the sweat of the brow. It wasn't about working so hard that you sweated. It was about the stress and the worry and the anxiety that you have that your crops are going to fail, that you're going to not be okay and you're not going to have what you need. You know what I mean? When you're so anxious, so worried about something in your life. And in today's age, in the 21st century America, we're not usually stressing over and sweating over whether we're going to have enough food. But there's other things that we stress about. What do you stress about? Leave me a comment. Let me know what you stress about, what you're stressing about now. But I can think of a lot of things. I can think about how we stress about whether our children are going to be safe. We stress about whether we're going to lose our job and be unemployed. Or maybe we stress about whether we're going to be able to find enough laborers to work in our company, or whether our business is going to succeed or whether it's going to fail. We stress about our health and whether, we're going to get some kind of disease that's going to take our life or severely limit us. We have a lot of things that we stress about. Even in the modern age, we may not be stressing about food, although we need to understand that food is not something that we can take for granted just because we live in America. But there's a lot of things that remind us how fragile life is and how vulnerable we are. And we need to remember that we need God. Don't ever think that God is something that you've outgrown. That in the modern world, we can depend on science, we can depend on technology. What do we need God for? Well, listen, I want to tell you, you still need God. So, call upon Him. Make sure your heart is right with Him through Jesus Christ, because none of us knows how much time we have. But we do know this: God is real. God is almighty, all-powerful. He's all-loving. We can see that through Jesus Christ and what He did for us on the cross. And God is all-knowing. He's full of wisdom. So, let us make sure we keep our heart right with God. Let us make sure that we depend upon Him and live for Him. For when we do, then we can be like Adam and Eve in the garden before the fall, back when they lived in paradise. Everything was taken care of. They had nothing to fear, nothing to lose, because they knew God was on their side. He was going to take care of them. My friends, if Jesus Christ is your Lord and you're faithfully serving Him, you can know you have nothing to lose and that God is going to take care of you. For if you're in the Lord's army, He's going to make sure you have the supplies to do the fight. That doesn't mean you're not going to have hardship. That doesn't mean that you might not get sick. And of course, we all know that eventually this old body of ours is going to wear out. But even that is not loss. Because even if we lose this life, when we lose this life, when we trust in Jesus Christ, we know that we have eternal life with God forever. And we will truly be in paradise, which heaven, I like to think of it as the most beautiful, productive, wonderful garden that we've ever experienced. Eternal life with God forever in that beautiful paradise garden, which we could just say is like the Garden of Eden. Well, my friends, thanks for joining me on a little walkthrough of my garden today as I ramble. Glad that you're with me. Hope that you will hit the like button if you like this video, and if we're joining us for the first time, be sure to subscribe to my channel, because I like to talk about doing things yourself. I like to talk about growing a fruitful garden and growing personally. So thank you for joining me today. Y'all be blessed, and we'll see you next time. Now let's get out there and let's grow and be fruitful.